So good morning, everyone. Good morning and welcome to former faculty, former staff, former students, former trustees, our board of visitors, members of our alumni board, our neighbors from Columbia Point and from Greater Boston, current leadership of the university, and all of our faculty, staff, and students who took time out this morning to be here. As you can see, I am excited. I am just so excited to have you here with us this morning. For many of you, I'd like to add, welcome home. Welcome home. I hope you don't recognize home, but I hope that you recognize the spirit, the values, the culture of home. We'll never lose that. Even though we're decorating a little bit, what you help build here matters. And so that soul will never leave this space. So thank you, thank you, thank you, and welcome home. I'm so pleased to see so many of you here today. And I want you to know that your university, this Commonwealth's capital city public research university, the University of Massachusetts, Boston, welcomes you. It will always be your home. Now, many of you haven't been back to this campus in some time. And there was some question when we said earlier that we wanted to bring back all the chancellors and all of you. First, we started out in a classroom. Then it moved to the alumni lounge. Then it was one ballroom. Then it was the second one. Now it's the third one. And now people are hearing about it, and watch how this room fills up now that they know that we're all here and you are all here today. And so if you haven't been in this amazing building before, welcome. We thank you for coming. Now I'm going to do what I know they're going to tell all of you to do. Please turn these off. We have lots for you to pay attention to today. I see that Representative Sanacandro is here. Thank you so much for being here today. And if there are any other elected officials, acknowledged. We're so grateful to have you. If you're out there somewhere, thank you. We also want to say it's my distinct privilege to share the stage this morning with all of my University of Massachusetts Boston Chancellor colleagues. We have an all-star lineup for you today, and we're going to be bringing them up in that manner. I want to thank all of you, fellow chancellors, for accepting my invitation to return to campus and reflect upon your university, past, present, and future, as we continue this long celebration of our 50 years of doing wonderful things in excellence here at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. I also want to say thank you to Jean. Dr. Jean McCormick, thank you. You served this university well. You served here as Chancellor, as A&F Vice Chancellor, as a faculty member, as Chancellor of the Dartmouth campus, and now we're glad you came home as President of the amazing Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate. Jean, welcome home. Now, when it came to having a moderator with all of this talent on the stage this morning, we knew we had to call in someone who was very strong. So, Jean, we brought you in to do that. Thank you for keeping us on track, on point, and on discussion this morning. I'm looking forward to an engaging and absorbing discussion, and so I'm going to get right to it in a moment. But before I do that, we have someone who is never a guest on this campus, but always welcomed here. The president of this university system, Bob Corrett, is here this morning. I've asked Bob to come up and say a few words to set the tone, and then I'm going to bring my fellow chancellors up to the stage. They wonder how they're going to get up to these chairs. We're going to bring you up and put you in those chairs. You got it, man. Thank you.
I was saying as I arrived early, I was reading the materials, this is probably the only campus in the country where I actually know everyone that has been chancellor, and I know them all quite well. And it's an exciting day for me to be here. Bob Corrigan and I worked for 9 years together in California, and Joanne and I were provosts together when she was at Old Dominion and I was at Towson. And of course, the other chancellors have all been part of the family since I arrived here 4 years ago. So it's a special day for me as it is for this campus. It's been a great 50-year journey for the University of Massachusetts, Boston. And Keith and I hit it off as soon as I took the job as president, and continue to hit it off, in large part because of the 9 years I spent at San Jose State, which is an urban campus in California. The mission of San Jose State and the age of San Jose State, though a little bit older, reflects very much the history and mission of what's happened on this campus. And what you're seeing here today after 50 years, and what we'll be talking about in a moment, is a maturation process for a campus that started with a mission that was an access mission, a mission to really serve the Boston community and beyond, but watching that mission continue to grow and mature from every perspective, from the size of the buildings and the number of buildings, the number of students and the complexity of the student body, from the global reach today, but never losing that initial mission of providing access and a pathway to the future for the students of this great city. So it's an exciting time for me to be here, to listen to my old friends and colleagues talk about this campus. I'm looking forward to hearing the real story and the real stories behind the story that we all read about. And I can assure you, knowing what's happening at the system level and what's happening at the State House with the help of Representative Conasana-Condro and other members there, that the future of UMass, though we will go through ups and downs with state budgets, as we always do across this country, the future of UMass and the future of UMass Boston looks very, very bright. Thanks for having me here today with you.
My man, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Bob. Before we start, though, I'd like to thank all of the wait staff and everyone who's worked so hard this morning to put this program together. Put your hands together for them. I also want to say to all my mentors in this room and all of my elders who have ever touched me in some way, I haven't lost my mind. I haven't not acknowledged you this morning. I'm acknowledging all of you at one time. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now let's get on with this. Gene, come on up and take your seat. Gene McCormick, ladies and gentlemen. Starting us out in the first chair up here, Robert Corrigan, Chancellor Robert Corrigan. Give him a round of applause as he comes to the stage. Someone who's been an unbelievable mentor from the West Coast, and we're so grateful to him. Sherry Penny, come on up, Sherry Penny, and take your space. So honored to have you on campus with me all of the time as a mentor and friend. Next, we have the lady who was wise enough to convince me to come off of Huntington Avenue, come here to this university and arm me with everything necessary to become chancellor here in the lead. Joanne Gore, ladies and gentlemen. So honored to have you here with us today. And to the gentleman who has become a brother to me, someone who has a special place in my life, and I'm so honored to serve with in this university, in our system, Michael Collins, ladies and gentlemen. What an amazing lineup. And now I will take my seat, Gene, and get out of your way.
Well, welcome everyone. I am especially honored to be able to sit here with 36 years of leadership of the UMass Boston campus, 37 if you add in my brief period. I have had the pleasure of working closely with all of them, and they all came at a time when UMass Boston had different needs. So we're going to reflect over this 37-year period. And what I asked them to do, when I started to think about this, I said, you know, all of us have in our mind a definition of leadership. So I thought I'd start by reminding us of one of the things that John Quincy Adams said. He said that if your actions inspire others to dream more, to learn more, to do more, and become more, you are a leader. All of these people have done this. So I asked them to think first, and I'm going to run down the line quickly here and say, if you were to characterize your years of leadership, what phrase would you use? What adjective would you use? Then I'm going to come back and ask you to take 5 minutes each, and I'm going to be strict. If I come up behind you, that means I've done this many times over the years with them, you know, that we need to move on so that we have some time for some interaction with you as the audience and to ask some questions about looking at the future. Bob's probably had the most time to reflect back on his leadership, although being busy being the president of San Francisco State University. So Bob, how would you characterize the Bob Corrigan years of leadership?
I can give you one word. It's passion.
Passion.
It's passion for the institution. It's passion for the students, for the staff. It's a commitment to the kind of institution that a place like Boston needs. So I'll just simply say that it's passion is how I would describe it.
Sherry?
I would say 2 words, building and risk-taking. Building on the strengths that were in place and taking risks to move it to the future in the ways that it needed to go.
And I guess I would use the 2 words, tumultuous and transformative. It was a tumultuous time, and I'll be glad to expand on that. And I think it was a transformative time because I think not only did we lay the plans for so much that followed, but it makes me so excited to see that so many of the people that I hired are now either have remained in leadership positions or assumed new leadership positions and are moving the campus forward. So I would say tumultuous and transformative.
Michael?
You know, I reflected back, I have to use a phrase, and I think it was my unwillingness to accept the just good enough motive which had sort of been applied to UMass Boston. My inauguration speech, I actually talked about that I thought the outside world felt that the faculty was just good enough, that the students were just good enough, that the buildings were just good enough. What I had found was incredible excellence, and that we needed to work to make that excellence, the excellence that lived within our campus understood by all.
Great. Now, hard for Keith because he's still doing this.
Well, it's really not hard because I've had the opportunity to sort of build on all of these wonderful leaders' work. And I've also had the ability to have each of their counsel. What an amazing thing. I'm wise enough to know that we do this as a community. So the notion of transformation resonates with me, but also preparing this excellence for the kind of contributions that this institution is going to make, not only to this Commonwealth, but to the world, is something that has been the journey. So I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to stand on the shoulders of these giants, and I'm quite humbled to sit here with them today. So, you know, I'm so grateful for that.
Great.
And to be able to say thank you for all of your leadership. The good parts that were great for you and the parts that we'll discuss that weren't so great, because it all ends up making a difference here at this university. So thank you.
I always say, when I write my book, it's going to be called You Can't Make This Stuff Up. So what I'm asking the chancellors to do is to reflect each about the characteristic they talked about and about their years at UMass Boston. But I told them that they can add some of those things that they might not have talked about when they were the chancellor. So Bob, you want to start us off?
all of these stories are obviously personal, and nobody's going to carry away any of the information from this. And Ed Toomey's going to stand outside the door, and he's going to get anybody that's got a recording device. But interview process. This last winter you've had, I was interviewed during one of the worst storms that New England had. Came back after that to meet with then President David Knapp, and Knapp says, you know, I'm prepared to offer you the job, but I got to ask you first if you'll take it under the circumstances that it's being offered to you. And I said, well, explain the circumstances. And he said, well, you know, the president of the Senate, Bill Bulger, and he named 2 other politicians, he said, you know, they're off in Ireland right now. Get away from the cold weather here. You go to Ireland, you get away from the cold weather. I mean, that's it. But at any rate, he said, you know, they're coming back with a plan to reduce the number of state colleges from 10 to 9. And you're going to have to, if you take the job of Chancellor, you're going to have to oversee the merger. Well, we did it. I mean, we actually did it in 18 or 19 days. We brought Bob Wood back from retirement. There was a terrific dean of the business school at that point, Tex Elam. I don't know whether Tex was contacted or not, but we had some former chancellors and deans that worked on this. And it will surprise none of you that know the history of politics in Massachusetts that the state didn't save a penny. You know, we went through all of this process. Except for the people that were retiring anyway, you know, nobody went off the payroll. The brilliance of the plan actually was that we strengthened UMass Boston by bringing in programs that had existed before. We didn't have a nursing program, if you can imagine that. We didn't have a physical education program. But we also understood, you know, that we had a terrific history department or a great biology department, and I go on and name, but, you know, we weren't looking for new faculty necessarily for those departments, and we were able to strengthen many of the other state colleges in Massachusetts because of the fact that these folks were now available to move. And I'll stop in a second, but another one of the strengths and I know there's some former Boston State folks here. It used to be said of the Globe that if you wanted to talk to a Boston Globe reporter about an urban issue, you had to dial 1 first. Well, think about that. At any rate, UMass faculty lived out in the suburbs. That's where they lived. Boston State faculty lived in the city. They lived in South Boston, they lived in Dorchester, et cetera. And they were closer, I think, to the people that we were trying to serve. And that added, I think, to the strength of the institution as an urban institution. Was it a challenge to do the merger? Absolutely. But was it worth all of the time and effort? Absolutely as well.
That's interesting.
Terrific. A really important phase. And so many of the Boston State faculty and staff who came become key leaders in the various departments at UMass. So a really important moment. I remember I was in China for a vacation, and I came back, and my dad picked me up, and he said, you know, today they merged Boston State and UMass. I said, no, they're talking about it. He said, no, today they did it. the way things happen in Massachusetts. Sherry, when you reflect on your period following Bob.
Well, I reflect on Bob's in terms of building and risk-taking, and I remember that after I took the job, we had an inauguration ceremony, and one of the guests from Washington, D.C. called me Mindy Mouse. So I figured I would have to be Mindy Mouse from the 12 and a half years that I was president, including the year when I went back downtown to be president of the system. But when I think about building, I think one of the most significant things we were able to do, building on what Bob Corrigan had done, was become a Carnegie doctoral institution, because up to that point we didn't have a sufficient number of doctoral programs. So with the help of many people in this room, we added 8 doctoral programs between 89 and 95. In 95, we were classified a Carnegie doctoral institution. That was an enormous amount of work to do because we were also the budget was being cut 12 times. I do not want to discuss that. Discussed it enough in the past, but it was really an exciting time to be a part of UMass, to see us become a doctoral institution. And now you are, of course, Carnegie Research Intensive. And with that doctoral building, we also added some centers and institutes that I think are really interesting. And one of them I'm going to talk about is risk-taking. Quote my hockey legend, Wayne Gretzky, "You will miss 100% of the shots you don't take." So we did some high-risk things. I got a call from Betty Taymor at Boston College, and she said, "We have the Center here for Women in Politics and Public Policy. We think it belongs at UMass Boston." I said, "We have no money, we have no space, but come on." So they came, and of course it has totally flourished. It was high risk and great payoff. We added 2 other institutes at that time of note also, the Asian American and the Gaston, thanks to leadership of Peter Chiang, Paul Watanabe, and Miran Uranti. So I think the building into the doctoral was extremely, extremely important for us. Now I have many more things to go on, but I'll come back to some of the other things. But to me, there was building and risk-taking were some of the things that happened early on that were very, very important.
Great. So, Ms. Tumultuous, what was tumultuous?
This is so interesting to hear this this evolution. So I came to UMass Boston on August 2001, and everybody knows what happened 9/11. Just 1 month later, I remember the provost assistant walking into a cabinet meeting saying, "You need to come and turn on the television. You need to come and watch the television." And, you know, we thought, what in the world is she talking about? So everybody knows what happened 9/11. And this campus, of course, was in the flight path from Logan. So there was a real sense of emotion around that. around that. I also had been hired by Bill Bulger. Now, my husband Roy likes to say that I'm the only honest hire that was ever made in Boston, and I am sure that that is a gross exaggeration. But I knew no one. I did not know Mr. Bulger. I knew no one. But I felt very much that I was his hire. And it was a tumultuous time because Bill Bulger went head-to-head with Mitt Romney and lost. And all of a sudden, the man who hired me, who was behind me in every sense of the word, was no longer in the president's office. And that was a very scary feeling. Plus, at the same time, building on what Bob and Sherry had done, I came in and in my inauguration speech, which, by the way, was accompanied with union protests because the state had not fulfilled the agreed upon contractual raises. The state had turned down a $218 million proposal to build dorms. We were trying to, as Sherry had built the graduate programs, we were trying to shore up the undergraduate programs. And we put together a proposal to start building dorms here. It was a $218 million proposal. It was turned down by the governor's office, and subsequently Bill Bulger was fired. And it was a very scary feeling being in this chancellor's office. Plus, before I left, the budget had been cut 29%. So we needed to lay the groundwork for a lot of needed changes to take place. One last element of the tumultuous aspect, I will never forget the day that a chunk of cement fell on a car in the garage. And I remember thinking, thank God no one was in that car. Thank God it is just property damage. But what does this foretell? And we put together a proposal to repair these garages that was going to cost $65 million. And I thought, I cannot believe we will be spending $65 million to repair a garage. But we tried to lay the groundwork for a lot of changes, starting with trying to provide freshman housing for students. At the time, before I left, we had 300 students who were housed in the Harborview apartments. It was the beginning of what is now going to take place several years later. We put an emphasis on research. As Sherry had built up the graduate programs, our strategic plan was entitled Research, Retention, and Reputation. We wanted to put a greater emphasis on building up the research infrastructure. We put in place an IT strategic plan that got us into Internet 2 and that transformed the technology on campus, brought us tech-smart classrooms, introduced training for faculty members. That was very exciting. We put together a strategic plan, as I said, that was entitled Research, Retention, and Reputation. We wanted to expand the Honors College. We wanted to introduce new elements to it. We actually increased the diversity of the freshman class and raised the GPA at the same time. I think we were excited by the opportunity to make physical changes on the campus. Sherry laid the groundwork and got the money to build this building, but I got the privilege of supervising the construction, and we held our first fundraising event in this room, right here, and I will never forget it, because we had started developing the fundraising capacity over the previous year and a half, and we had so many wonderful visitors to this campus. We had Chinua Achebe, we had Tim Russert, we had Bill Russell, we had Marion Wright Edelman, we had Andy Card, whose wife had graduated from UMass Boston. So we were laying the groundwork for what I could see was wonderful fundraising opportunities. So between the IT strategic plan, we did have a facility strategic plan, which is minuscule compared to what's going on now, but it was really to just improve what was going on. We opened this magnificent facility in 2003 or 4, I guess, and it was an exciting time.
So, Michael, you inherited the garage problem that we all gave you.
So I'd like to just tell a few stories about my time here. As you know, my brother and I were in the search together, and it was a very, you want to talk about tumultuous week as that was getting decided. But Bob, I was asked to have my interview to meet the president of the university in the men's room at the Parker House Hotel.
Doesn't surprise me.
And the reason was that if I went to the president's office, that everybody would know that I was a candidate. Why else would I show up there? And there's a private room that goes up from, you come out of the men's room, you can go up the stair, and there's a private room, and that's where I met Jack Wilson. My first day here, I removed your furniture from my office. And I sent it to the development office. And I went to the basement warehouse. And I got some furniture from, I got a dining room table, a couple of leather chairs, and a couple of bookcases, and I brought them up to the office. And Ellen came in to see me about 10 o'clock, and she said, the adjunct faculty want to see you. And I said, what do they want to see me about? And they said, well, there's a contract provision, et cetera, and they want to talk to you about it. 2 members of the faculty would like to see you. And I said, okay, well, what's the issue? And she said, well, there's this issue for pay for adjuncts, and I said, well, what does it come out to? And she said, it's $147,000. And I said, Ellen, that's a rounding number from my former life. We're going to just do it. She said, you're crazy. And 2 became 4, became 8. 22 faculty actually showed up to my office on the first day, sat in my office, and I had all this stuff that had come from the basement. Now, you have to understand, with a little bit of retrospection here, this was a little bit about redemption for me. I had lost my job. I had run a healthcare system in Boston for 10 years, and all of a sudden I was out of the job. Peacock one day, feather duster the next. And I had done okay while I was running the hospitals, and I wanted to give back. I wanted to do a period of public service. And Mary Ellen and I wanted to do something together. And when we were interviewed here, our biggest hope, concern, worry was, could we become part of this community? And boy, I'll tell you, you embraced us like we will never forget. It was so special for us to be able to come here, to get to meet you. I started my first day on the loading dock. I just showed up there and I said, look at, hi guys, and I had some coffees and we met. Then I went to the police station. I thought it would be good to have the Department of Defense behind me. Now, you asked about the garage. June 14th, we leave a meeting at the DCAM office, and we have been told we need to shut the garage. And we meet in the lobby of Ashburton Place, and the decision is we have to shut the garage. And Ellen looks at me and she said, are you crazy? This is a commuter campus. There's no way you can shut this garage. I said, we just left these engineers. They said we got to shut this thing down. You're crazy. Can't possibly happen. Well, anyways, I happened to be down the Cape the following Friday, so 10 days later. And I called up and I said, how's the plan coming to shut the garage? And Ellen said, perhaps you didn't hear what I said. We can't shut the damn garage. And I said, I'll be up in 90 minutes. We're going to shut the garage. And no, you don't have to come up. I get it. And you'll remember that on July 18th, I believe it was, 4 tons of superstructure fell on what would have been 18 cars in the garage. And had we not closed it, there could have been people walking in the garage, cars parked there. It could have been a really serious problem. Now, to make a little light of that, I had a bunch of guys come up and ask me if because they know I had closed the garage, did I know the numbers for tomorrow's lottery? Because, you know, had we not shut the garage? And they said, well, maybe you know something but I could just end this little reflection by saying that to become part of the community was so special here because of what was so special about it. The faculty so committed to what actually went on in that classroom. The students so committed to actually coming every day because they were working so hard. Most of them were paying it for themselves. They wanted the knowledge that was going on in that classroom. The staff who gave of themselves each and every day. When the rain came, the water came in sideways. When it came in, it was incredible, but they had such pride for this institution. And on commencement each year, to have an opportunity to see the great joy that existed outside this building. I hope all of you realize, if those of you who have been part of it realize what a very special place this is. And I can tell you, even though we were here for only 2 years, and perhaps I'll tell more about that in a minute, what a special community we had and what a great privilege it was for Mary Ellen and I to be part of.
Thank you, Michael. My friend.
So 2 things, fulfilling the promise and gift to the future. So I had it easy because all of that had been done prior to me coming into the seat. And so as I walk around this campus sometimes, I always realize the blessing of having had you do all of the heavy lifting, you know, having had you come in and to have this wonderful merger of talent, Boston State and this great University of Massachusetts, Boston, all together at once. We acknowledge that right next door, and every day we pay homage to that legacy. So we're grateful for that. To the trajectory, I came here as this private school, attitude-driven person who thought when Joanne Gore recruited him, he was going to come over here and save someone, not realizing that this place had actually saved the passion that I had for higher education. It was waning. Angie and I were concerned about that because all of a sudden what I had come into higher education for had sort of left. And I didn't feel it in my soul in the way that I had felt it when I was early in my career. And so coming to this institution and embracing it and being embraced by this wonderful community, one I thought I could never find again once I had left Northeastern, I found it right here on this campus, and it gave me a reason to believe again in all the things that were values to me personally, but just to the life's work. And so I build on the notion that our excellence should be driven in a way, and the faculty and others and our students, we should be talking about that. Our classification should be different, and it matters. The standards that we set, Joanne and Sherry and Bob, Michael alluded to the longest interview process in the history of the University of Massachusetts, Boston. It took me 18 months to come back to the campus. But one of the greatest byproducts of that was the relationship that our families developed as a result of not knowing each other, reading all these newspaper accounts of knowing each other, but getting to know each other and then working together for the common good of these students. So the gift to the future is that I have the opportunity to take all of this and help move this community forward, both to improve and to build on our academic reputation. But as we walk around this campus, my goal was to make sure that we resource them in ways that this campus had not been given an opportunity to have in the past. And it's because of what you built. It made it easier to go into and onto Beacon Hill and into other spaces that we needed to go in and talk about this university, and people understood that. And so I could get on the phone to Sherry and say, who was right here on campus, this is what I'm doing, what do you think? I could see Michael at a meeting. I'd see Joanne. Bob has been grateful over the years, gracious over the years when I see him at national conferences and beyond. In fact, one of the greatest things that I've been able to do is really come to grips with the reality that even though all of this looks good, there has been some evolution, that each of them has a piece of it. And so I honor that every day. I honored it when we honored our when we talked about some of the programs that we have here. We sort of go back to that chancellor and then point to that person as the person who really began that whole process. So it's exciting times. So we're building on that promise and we're gifting it to the future. And my responsibility is to push it and move it and sort of help it go off and provide for the next generation.
We'll talk in a minute. Thank you, Pete. We'll talk in a minute about the future, but you're all basically the glass is half full people. I mean, you never sign up for these jobs unless essentially you could do that.
That's very true.
But could you each, and we don't have to go in any particular order, talk about what you think your biggest challenge was and what was your biggest joy? What do you take the most pride in that you were able to participate in?
Let me start on that because we haven't talked about race relations at all, and I think that you can't really talk about the history of UMass Boston in Boston. Michael, I want to add something to your interview story. David Knapp, when he was interviewed for the presidency, and then the vote took place, the vote was in a closed room, okay? No reporters. The reporter from the Boston Globe, I forget her name now, but the reporter from the Boston Globe actually fell to her stomach outside of the door with her ear to the door to see what the vote was. David got in by one vote, and of course it got into the Globe right away, and there was all kinds of problems as a result of that, including the fact the faculty were mad, et cetera, and there was no inauguration for David Knapp, okay? So the next year, 3 chancellors were hired, Amherst and Worcester and Boston, and we were not allowed to have inaugurations because President Knapp hadn't had an inauguration. But I have sometimes defined the history, and it's somewhat inaccurate, but I've sometimes defined the history of UMass Boston while I was there to 2 Time magazine covers. On point of fact, one was a New York Times and the other was the Time magazine. But anyway, when I'm giving this story out in San Francisco, they don't know the difference. The first cover is of a UMass Boston graduate. Outside of City Hall, on that cement area out there, being attacked by somebody with one of these long flagpoles and the American flag on it, and into his stomach with that.
Jeez.
That's the first thing. As I was leaving UMass Boston, just before, I think maybe in my next to last year, cover of Time magazine, but this time 9 hot colleges. And one of the 9 hot colleges was UMass Boston. It's very, very important because, you know, we had still, some of us here have had a Midwestern sort of experience. In some ways, Boston really is a small town, you know, and with all these college universities. And it was typical of UMass Boston students in my day is, you know, if you're in the, you know, it's the, you know, the neighborhood bar or something like that, or you're with these other people, where do you go to school? I go to Harvard. Where do you go to school? You know, UMass Boston. Okay. After Time magazine came out, they were walking around town with copies of Time magazine in their pocket, you know, because they were so proud. You know, Keith has put all the portraits that I collected. I say he's put them over in the library. Okay. Why did I collect all these portraits? Because you were coming out of, you know, South Boston High. You're coming outdoor. You know, and people were going off to places where there was a sense of history, of the past, of what was done. You know, so. And I discovered that every time a dean of the college or school of education at Harvard retired, they'd bring a portrait painter in and they'd paint the portrait and it'd go up on the wall. Well, we had College 1, we had College 2. I mean, we had the science building. So we decided we'd put names on them. You know, the Phyllis Wheatley. McCormick got named. Nobody has mentioned Bob Quinn. But the deal, and I don't know, I'm talking out of school on some of these things. The deal that was cut was I would get Wheatley if he got McCormick. You know, it was Boston politics, you know, sure. And that kind of thing. But we put, you know, so we did that. We started with the institutes, with the McCormick Institute, with the Trotter Institute, and each of those has a kind of a history of its own. We had a faculty member in political science, one of whose students had gone to work for Tip O'Neill. And he discovered that there was a unique sort of program that allowed the Congress to do something monetarily in memory of one of its speakers. And so we went into Tip's office, and Joe Moakley was with us. And Moakley's a whole story. I mean, Moakley was with us. And the idea was that we were going to create something to honor McCormick. And so Tip says, well, yeah, well, let's get it done. What do you want to do? What do you want to do? Well, we want to create this institute. Well, $200,000 now, and finally the figure, I think, was $6 million to do the McCormick Institute. And so Tip says, let's do it now. Do it right now. Mogi says, well, how are we going to do it? And Tip says, I don't know, what's the next bill coming through? Well, the next bill coming through had to do with education, was something for 2-year institutions. And Tip says, yeah, we'll just put it on that. You know, we'll put it on. Get the job done. Moakley says, slow down, Tip. Slow down, Mr. Speaker. We can't do it that fast, you know. And O'Neill says, but, you know, who could be against John McCormick? You know, and Moakley says, tell me, Mr. Speaker, who in New Hampshire could have been against Mondale? At any rate, it was the kind of thing. You know, so that we did Trotter, which I think the Trotter Institute, which made such a real difference, comes out of the fact that the legislature actually wanted to give us money. Mm-hmm. They wanted to increase the support for the Black Studies. Do we call it Afro-American? I can't remember.
Black Studies, definitely.
Black Studies. Well, we didn't have that many students taking courses in Black Studies. We didn't have that many majors, et cetera. But we get back to the whole idea of the research institution. What we weren't doing was enough of supporting research and scholarship. We convinced the legislator who wanted to, I think, double the budget of Black Studies, actually to allow us to create the Trotter Institute with the money that would have gone there, and that thing went up beautifully. So that was, I think, where we began really to sort of support research and scholarship was with those. But I think just simply being able, I'm not sure whether, I want to see how you got those portraits, over there in the library. But it was fun going into the different buildings and you would see the history there. The portrait that was done of me when I left in miniature, version of it hung on a wall at San Francisco State for my 20 plus years there. A final story I think is in that regard is probably when Paul Fontaine, another name out of the past, but Paul had worked for me for many years in California, and I said, Paul, when you become provost at UMass Boston, remember one thing: don't touch College 3. Don't you put your fingers on CPCS. He says, "What?" I said, this, this will leave it alone. Don't touch it. What's the first thing that Paul does when he comes out, or maybe not the first thing, was to yank that. Another quick story. Joe Kennedy graduated from that, and when he introduced me to his mother at an event down at Senator Kennedy's home, he was just talking about how important this had been. He had flunked out of MIT. I think everybody knows that. He didn't make it through MIT, but he got through College. Anyway, his mother says, "Gosh," she gives me a hug and she says, "You saved my son. That was so great." I said, you have to be honest in this game. And I said, "I didn't have anything to do with it. It was before my time." Kennedy says, "You blew it, Corrigan." But there were little things like that you did. But the challenge for me really was the racial stuff. When we absorbed Boston State College, we still had the buildings before the art school got them. We ran a bus through some rather ugly parts of Boston, ugly neighborhoods. And some of those buses went at night to get students from one campus to another. And students came in to complain to me about the fact that the bus lights, interior lights, are being turned off at night, and they couldn't read while they were going from one campus to another. So I called the bus drivers in, find out what was going on. Well, we have to turn the lights off because otherwise people are throwing stones at the buses because there are students of color in those buses. I mean, what you see now in Boston is so different than what we were seeing in Boston at that time. And I like to believe that perhaps what all of us share here in common is that much of the change that has come, not enough change yet, but much of the change that has come in Boston with regard to race relations and the like is a role that we played. There was never during my time here a single racial incident on this campus. And I think it's probably true of you.
That's true.
This was a safe place. This was a place where races could come together and work on jointly on education. And I think that's one of the great things that we had contributed to this society was working as an institution to bring folks together.
Thank you.
I could follow up a little bit on what Bob said. I guess my biggest challenge was all the politics that went on. I suppose I could say I was here during a very political era, but that would be a lie since every day is politics in Boston. So, but it was the conversations with the local legislators were ongoing, and the conversations with the neighborhoods. They told me I was the first chancellor who had come to the neighborhoods. I met with over 400 community leaders and 15 neighborhood associations in my first year, but it was never enough. It was never enough. The conversations would go on, and you would think that people had been persuaded, but they never were. The neighborhoods were so strong, and their desires for the status quo were so strong that it was just hard to introduce new ideas. So I really got my my instruction in working in a public university. Although I'd spent my whole life working in public universities, I really got my instruction here at UMass Boston. I became so much smarter when I moved to the Midwest, which is a kinder, simpler place, where the agendas are not so deep and complex and go back generations. But I was now super sensitive to these issues because I had learned from my experience here. And it was a painful learning process, it really was, because I was so simple-minded. I thought you could go and talk to people and we could all agree and then we could all move on. But it just never worked out that way. It was a continuing challenge. And then when Bill Bulger was removed, it was kind of like, okay, now you have no one protecting you, no one at your back. I think my greatest joy was trying to increase the faculty and staff and students' pride in the institution. You know, we started doing simple things. We improved the signage on the campus. We planted flower beds. We put up pictures, wonderful Harry Brett pictures all over the campus. Yeah. We tried to make the campus more attractive on a very limited budget. We had a $7 million 3-year facilities budget. Ellen would laugh at this. And we tried to make cosmetic changes that would help stimulate pride in the campus. We started distributing the University Reporter to all students and all faculty, such a simple thing. I started having monthly lunches with students to talk about their experience here, and we tried to do everything we could on a very limited budget to increase people's pride in the campus. And part of that was reaching out to people like Tim Russert and Bill Russell to come back here, to engage the Kennedy family. Obviously, Keith has hauled all the water on this, but I had the first meeting with Ted Kennedy to talk about putting the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the Study of the Senate here on campus. And I will never forget, and trust me, I forget a lot, but I will never forget sitting in his office in Washington and talking about his brother's legacy and how the family wanted that his institute to be here. And that was
now, Joanne, you
exciting.
can sit in his office right up the street.
That's right. That's right. In my house in Williamsburg, Virginia, I still have a page from the congressional record that he signed thanking UMass Boston for the support that we had extended to financially challenged students. And so really showing people, which I think I think this is a theme of all the administrations, of really encouraging people to take pride in what this university is all about and what it offers and how it changes lives. It changes lives. And it has a great history.
I can pick up on them.
Go
I'm
ahead.
going to do the joys and then the challenge, which will fit in with the Joanne and Bob stories. Because I can see Pat Davidson right there. One of the biggest joys was work with Pat Davidson and Monica McAlpin to double the size of the honors program and have our first 2 Fulbright students. And you'll remember Alexander Penna and Colin Ward. It was really a very exciting, joyful thing. Another very exciting and joyful thing, I think, for us was to reach out to the business community in Boston and appoint a Great Cities Advisory Board of businessmen who would help us plan for the future, businessmen and women, plan for the future of the campus. And they came in very handy when in 2000, we hosted the first ever presidential debate in New England, co-hosted with the Kennedy Library. But to host the debate, we had to raise $1 million. So I went to this Great Cities Advisory Board and the business colleagues and said, okay, help us. And the money came in very, very quickly. A breakfast that we held downtown again. I remember I sat next to Ted Kennedy, who said, don't tell Vicki what I'm eating. Because he was having all the eggs and bacon and everything that could be there. But we raised $1 million and had that first presidential debate in the Clark Center. And the UMass Boston family, faculty, staff, and particular staff and students came together to get the Clark Center ready for 3,000 people. And because Gail Hoban is here, I have to mention one other very joyful event for us, because I can see her picture still. We had as our honorary degree recipient in 1990, Robert Redford. And he was not here because he was a movie star. In 1990, 25 years ago, 1 month from today, Robert Redford gave one of the most profound speeches on climate change and the environment that anyone has heard anywhere, and called on us all to get busy and clean up this environment. UMass Boston campus, June of 1990 with Robert Redford. So that was a very joyful event. And the other one I'll just sort of mention is Michael Luck came to me one day, and I think you worked with Michael too, and said, we need to do a capital campaign. University's never done one. We're going to do $50 million. And he said, I know you're going to get 5 gifts of $1 million each. I don't know where they're going to come from, but I can tell you it's going to happen. So with high risk, but I said, okay, let's do it. Well, we did it. We got the $50 million. But perhaps 2 of the gifts that were most exciting were that the first endowed chair on this campus came from a 1969 alum, Elton Brand, who was head of Litton Industries in California. He funded the first chair in the sciences, which is now held by a woman scientist. And I could come back and talk about the struggles on the scientists, but that was a very, very joyful thing for us to have happen. The other gift that goes back a little further, but some of you remember that we had very little money ever from the state or any other place. And we had done very little really substantial fundraising, but in my first year here, they did a party for everybody who gave us $100. And I said, well, next year we're not going to do that party. We're going to only do a party if they give at least 1,000. And we went to one of our alums to try to get a gift from her, and Diddy Cullinane gave us $25,000. In 1889 on this campus, that was a huge amount of money. At a faculty meeting later that week, I said to them, because we were in our 3rd or 4th budget cut by that time, out of the 12, I don't remember which was which. And I said to the faculty and staff, we've gotten this $25,000 gift to help junior faculty do research so they can get tenure. I'm going to give 1 week's take-home pay to a fund called the Chancellor's Fund and ask you to join me so we can build up some money for our students. And within about 2 weeks from the faculty and staff, I had another $25,000. So when Diddy Cullinane came to be thanked for her gift, I told her this. I said, we thank you for your gift, but we've raised another $25,000 from the faculty to help students. And her husband was with her, and he wrote a check for another $25,000. So 25 became 75. And that doesn't sound like much, but for us to raise that kind of money back in 1989 in the midst of all those budget cuts was a huge issue for us, I think, that helped get that fundraising going, that helped us fund the debate, that helped us raise the $50 million in the endowed chairs. So there were a lot of really, really joyful moments. My challenges are going to sound like my colleagues. They were political. Dealing with the politics here is always challenging. And I remember one board meeting where we had to go in and raise the admission standard, because this was a requirement of our Board of Trustees and also the Board of Regents, so we all agreed to do that. 1 day later, I get a call from a board member who wants a friend of a friend of a friend admitted to nursing school. And I said, but we just changed the admission standards. She is not eligible. Well, Sherry, there has to be something you can do. And so, of course, Bob and Joanne and Sherry and Michael and Keith, we had to figure out what to do, because when a board member or a community local leader calls, you have to figure out what to do. We could write several books on just the political challenges, I think, and we could have a whole other panel just on that. But I thought, how ironic, you just passed these standards yesterday, and today you're calling me to tell me to violate the standards because you need it violated. But the student was fine, and what we usually did in those situations was say, come take a course or 2 and we'll see how you do, and then we can figure out the best academic plan for you. But I would say the joys were many more than the challenges.
I need to move you along because I want you to be thinking about, the last question is about the future. What do you envision? What do you hope for UMass? We're celebrating 50 years. And what do you think the next 50 years are going to look like?
I think Keith should answer that.
Well, first of all, continuing to build on the work that all of my predecessors started, we love the fact that we are the most diverse public university in New England. I love bringing colleagues here. I host, as you know, and chair ASCU, the Association of State Colleges and Universities, and we had our 50th celebration here on campus, and we also had our board meeting here. And it was amazing to see those presidents and leaders walk around and see what they're trying to build to in 2025 or 2030. This campus now with 150 countries represented, close to 17,000 students, programs that have moved to colleges like the Honors College instead of the Honors Program, schools for inclusion, environmental sciences. There are a College of Management, College of Public and Community Service, which was mentioned here. I just did their convocation, taking off. What I see in the future is an institution that becomes probably among the top in the world at several things. One, being able to be in a great city like Boston has an unbelievable advantage because the implications that our research in other modes have for the world. So our honors program focuses on Boston, and then it goes out from there, whether it's in the sciences, and environmental sciences, what have you. A place that stays true to its roots in terms of this excellence should not mean that it becomes elitist in some form where the access mission that our founders talked about, tripping over opportunities on your way to success is not. I love commencement. I love this commencement here when you want to know about special times. When you can stand there and close to 60% of the students are first generation college students, of which I'm one. It's an amazing, amazing thing to see. But more importantly, when you see the families are so grateful for this opportunity to serve, we never want to lose that. And so I talk about things that my colleagues tease me about a lot. We talk about being a research university, but we never want to lose our teaching soul. We talk about being an urban public research university, but we never want to stop being student-centered. You know, we talk about this transformation physically in our physical plant, but we're more than buildings. We never want to lose the thing that brought me here, the things that keeps my passion, the values, the core values that we as educators have been in this business for, the good and the bad of it. It's always centered back in what brought you here, because we believe wholeheartedly that if given the opportunity for exposure to education, it transforms lives, which transform communities, which transforms, you know, those around them, and then goes out and makes a difference in the world. So we're excited here. I'm just so honored to build on your work. And this today is like a booster shot, having all of you here, because it reminds me of how fortunate I am to have had you prior to my opportunity to serve, serving as willingly as you did, going through what you did. Because when I think about some of the challenges you mentioned, politically and otherwise, my greatest challenge is trying to do it all at once. And I wish you could feel what that felt like during your tenure, because it's coming from all spaces. Everyone wants to help, and I love that. So that's the challenge that I have, is saying as Chancellor, you know, as Chancellors, we wanted to do it yesterday. And knowing that, you know, we need to continue to move it and drive it, but to make sure that we continue to do it, because tomorrow is the gift that we're all preparing for. So thank you for allowing me to say that.
Great. Any other?
Boston is the only place that I know that has private institutions, private universities that are also public in terms of what they do. And I'm talking about Boston College, I'm talking about Boston University, I'm talking about Northeastern. At least those are the three that provided, for me at least, a kind of, because they reached out in ways. At one point, we added up that the number of students who transferred from there I go, UMass Boston to Northeastern was roughly the same number that transferred from Northeastern to, I mean, it's kind of like, and that was and so in the minds of folks growing up in Boston, you know, that the thought was you went to the private institution. You know, it was quality, et cetera, et cetera. You know, and these are not institutions that turned their back on the city. I mean, I think of Ken Ryder and Don Monin, for example, as two heads when I was here that were terrific. John Silber, that's another case.
Yeah, that's another panel. That's another panel.
Silber once said that he thought that we didn't really need another four-year public institution, but the campus would make a nice place to park buses or something like that. It was, you know, that kind. He once welcomed me to a meeting by saying, "And we're so delighted to have the community colleges represented."
That's him.
But I think you know, and Harvard, for example, Skip Gates and what's the name of the lawyer, the female lawyer at Harvard. Anyway, Skip and this faculty member once, because they knew so many of the black students at Harvard, once kind of tried to total up, you know, how many of the Harvard African-American students could trace their families to slavery? Mm-hmm. Only about 1/3, okay? So what you were looking at in terms of minority students here, these are people who are from the community. And I think, Keith, what I've seen, particularly in the folks that have followed me here, is people, the city now embracing the role of this, that this is the, and I'd like to conclude, you know, we haven't talked about, this is about students. My favorite student story is, I don't know whether you still give the Rose Kennedy Award, which, you know, I think it's probably the only award that, you know, actually is paid for by the family that gives it out. And one of my delights was, and I'm sure you've done the same thing, was interviewing the person before graduation who would get the Kennedy Award. And this scruffy-looking guy comes into the office. He was Asian, actually. He was Vietnamese. He comes into the office. Oh, he was delightful. I mean, to talk to him, I had this great conversation with him. He was a computer science major, and he was all A's, okay? Graduated with 4.0. But while he was here, he was also taking computer science courses at MIT, graduate courses in computer science at MIT, and he was getting all A's in those. And he had already been selected for the PhD program in computer science at MIT, okay? That's part one of the story. I told you he was scruffy. And so I talked to him, and I learned that he had a job. He worked 30 hours a week on this job to earn money. And I blurted out, I said, what are you doing with the money? You know, because he obviously wasn't putting it on his back, and I knew he didn't have a car. He said, been one of the Vietnamese boat people. He had gotten out of Vietnam because his family and his friends made it possible for him. Where was that money from the 30 hours a week going? He was sending the money back home. Now, you could duplicate that. This happens to be a Vietnamese student, but you could duplicate that story, you know, for people that were born here, that may be 3 miles from here. I mean, but there was a sense of family and obligation, and we are the institution that can provide that kind of a promise and thing. And so I think the students, as much as anything, during my day, made this a really exciting place to be.
You know, I think that the challenge we have as the University of Massachusetts at large is really embodied in what goes on this campus, and that is the recognition in our Commonwealth at how terrific our institution is. I have the opportunity to medical school now to travel all over the world, and the brand of the University of Massachusetts outside of Boston is many times much greater than it is here. I would hope for the future that the faculty have the acclaim of Paul Tucker and Wilfredo Chiesa, two terrific artists. And I look at the number of people here that I had the great opportunity to recruit to come to our campus. I would hope with time that the faculty understand the blessing that is Rajni Shriekamp and Roger Shute. I just hope that this faculty will get that acclaim with time. I'll tell you a story about Dr. Rock. I'm very proud of Rocco DeBecco. He's a student who played hockey here. He was captain of the hockey team. He came to see me when he was a junior. And he said to me, you know, Doc, I want to go to medical school. And I said, well, you got a big choice to make, because you can't play hockey and go to medical school. Just won't work. And he said, you don't understand. Hockey's part of me. And I said, you have a choice. You can either play hockey, you can go to medical school. But given what you got here, you're not going to be able. He's going to graduate on the 18th of May, and he's going to enter a neurosurgery residency in New Jersey. And at every step of the way, I've had the great privilege of spending a lot of time with Rock. And I know the coach wasn't too happy with me, but I know the student is thrilled. And when I look at the staff here, and I look at the people who have given their lives of service, I can't tell you how many of you said you've been here for 30 years. My greatest disappointment was that we only had 2 years here. And I remember meeting someone in line at the opening party, and they said to me, you're my 7th chancellor. And I said, well, I hope I'm your last. 2 years later, at my going away party, he shook my hand, he said, nope, you're not my last. My other great disappointment, and I'm going to say it because it's important to me, is that Pat Monteith never let me read the news on WUMB. Never once in all the time here. So, Gene, when I left, I said to Keith, think of our 2 years here as what the architect has done. Now go be the builder. And I would hope as we go into the future that every student that walks across that stage, every parent who interacts with this community, every staff member who gains their livelihood here, every faculty member who lives there, every academic pursuit, every leader who gives their heart and soul to our institution will realize how profound the impact this university can have on the world.
Here, here.
Final word.
I would like to say, Jean, that I continue to teach here. I teach MBA and doctoral students in the business school, and I see the future in those classes every day I walk in, because 40% of them are not from the United States. So in some sense, what we say at UMass Boston is the university of the future. It's a university which is diverse, it's international, it's cutting edge in its research, its technology, its involvement with diverse cultures. So we, in a sense, are the future. And I think more universities will be copying our kind of hybrid model, dealing with the community for our research, and being with it. We've all told these stories about the students because the students here are very, very special. In my last MBA class, a student from China who was very shy but was straight A said to me, I'm getting married next month. Will you please make a video for my wedding? I've never been asked such a question before in my life. So Jim and I worked on the video, got the video down, and there was a video of me at his wedding in Shanghai. But it was because he really valued his UMass Boston experience, and he wanted that to be part of his marriage. He came back, got his MBA, and I got a copy of I got all the gifts from the wedding. But I would say another honorary degree recipient that we had was Lynn Shear. And when she left the platform that day after her speech, she gave me a baseball hat. But it's not a Red Sox hat. It says, failure is impossible. And to me, that's what I would say to UMass Boston. For everybody at UMass Boston, for UMass Boston, failure is totally impossible. It's only success.
You know, the final test of a leader, Walter Whitman said, is that they leave behind them the conviction and the will to carry on. These are 5 remarkable people who did that, and they give to you the creation of the future. All of you who were part of the past, if you're retired, but all of you who are still part of the present of UMass Boston. I think we would all say it has shaped who we are as people and who we are as leaders. So thank you all for joining us today to have this conversation.
So, hold up. So we're grateful for that ovation. But I have some things that I want to do. What an amazing morning. I want to thank again all of our University of Massachusetts Boston chancellors, Dr. Corrigan, Dr. Penny, Dr. Gora, Dr. Collins. Your perspectives, insights, and knowledge expressed are just amazing. I'm so grateful to stand on your shoulders, and on behalf of the entire university community, I thank you for your dedicated service and your continued passion for our mission to provide an education to all of those who desire it, equal to the best. I'd like to take this special opportunity to present each of you with one of our university's highest honors in recognition of all that each of you has accomplished as Chancellor and for your inspired leadership and steadfast advocacy. We could not have achieved all that we have without you. So today, without all the pomp and circumstance and without reading all of your bios, you can read all of that in the book. Please accept your Chancellor's Medal for unbelievable leadership and know that we are extraordinarily grateful for your service that each of you have given to this university. So this is one of the highest honors that we give here at the university. And so to you, Dr. Corrigan, thank you. To you, Dr. Penny, thank you. So grateful to you. To you, Dr. Gora, thank you.
Thanks so much.
To you, Dr. Collins, thank you. And we couldn't forget you, G. McCormick. Thank you.
Thank you, sweetie. Very nice of you.
Also, we're going to unveil today something that just came off the presses. The provost and others have been working on this, so we have a few advanced copies of UMass Boston at 50, the 50th anniversary history of the University of Massachusetts Boston. We're going to also present those to you today. Now, that's what we had you sign in the other room. You've all signed a book, and each of you have signed them, so we want you to take that with you. We're going to be celebrating the completion of the full press run at a reception that we're going to have. I know you keep saying, how many 50th anniversary events are you going to have? Well, we have another one before we get to commencement, and then the 4th of June will be our almost final event, which will be the gala. However, on the 18th of May, we're going to have a release party for this book. But today, I have for the president, and I have for everyone on the stage, signed editions. We're going to welcome all of you, and we're so grateful to you. So thanks to the chancellors, and thanks to everyone for attending today. Enjoy the rest of the day. We love you, and we're so grateful for all of you. Thank you.